of particularly high importance at this moment in time due to really heightened geopolitical pressures. The nature of the conversation thus impacts not just Afghanistan and her education, governance and development, but indeed the lives of people throughout the region, through Afghanistan and her neighboring countries. And so it is of vital importance that we take a moment to think about how can we as a university community and a community of scholars be thoughtful and intentional about supporting Afghanistan in its objectives, in providing resources, infrastructure, support, concepts, policy ideas, any inputs at all that can help the country of Afghanistan to double down, as it were, on its education, governance and development objectives. I am absolutely positive, given her background, that Dr. Nemat will pay particular attention to the importance of educating women. And that's something that, of course, resonates much more broadly across the nation than just in Afghanistan. And so I welcome that aspect of the dialogue as well. I don't know that I need to add more thoughts or take more time, and I will hand the podium over to Dr. Nemat, and I so look forward to your comments and the discussion to follow.
Thank you very much, Professor Folks. This is a great honor and pleasure to be connected to all of you. I think it's good morning in your part of the world, and where I am, I would say in Europe at the moment, it's good evening, and probably in my country, Afghanistan, and that region, it will be late evening or night. So it's a great honor and pleasure to be with all of you today and discuss a topic that probably is falling off news headlines in discussions and conversations. I am an Afghan, and it's my, probably I would say it's my moral responsibility, or an obligation I would call it, to at least attract the attention of the communities, particularly the scholarly communities, to at least continue the conversation and discussions around the countries like Afghanistan. So it is indeed I hope it will be productive 1.5 hours that we will have. And my goal is really not to provide simple, as we call, recipes for what are the solutions to the problems we are facing, whether it is in the field of education, field of governance or development, but to at least give you an insight of how things are on the ground and what are the possibilities in the ways that we look forward. As you mentioned, and my profile probably tells that, I'm currently leading Afghanistan Research and Evaluation Unit. It's a think tank and is focusing on social policy research. And research work is not directly sort of involved in politics. So one core principle that's in this particular field of academia, linking academia with actually policies and operationalization of programs on the ground, is to really maintain a very strong impartiality and independence. And in a country like Afghanistan, that has been enormously dependent on aid, on the external interferences and interventions and even invasions, twice at least in 40 years, we somehow have been ranked, AREU has been ranked one of the most independent organizations or think tanks based on the University of Pennsylvania ranking. We were 26th among 140 or something. So this fact, I'm just starting my conversation from speaking a little bit about my current role to give the audience some thinking of what are the possibilities and impossibilities in situations like Afghanistan and in context like the one that we talk today. So our role in this particular think tank is to really remain focused on continuing social policy research within the current context and try to highlight the challenges and problems that people of Afghanistan face. Our scope of work was much broader in the past, and since last August, with the situation change in the country and complete takeover of Afghanistan by the current ruling forces or the Taliban, known to the world, we have decided to remain active, mostly focusing on 4 key thematic areas, which means basically humanitarian aid and assistance, social protection and livelihoods, how poverty is affecting people, economic development, and at the same time, natural resources management. So these are thematic areas that, regardless of how the political situation or instability is working, they are critical to the living conditions of people and how it could be better, a change for better. So, I mean, one theme that I like to sort of draw the attention of audience here is that, well, no matter if countries like Afghanistan experience being on the top of the headline and then falling off that, and whether we are following the day-to-day what happens there or not, I know that most of the international community, including the United States, had forces on the ground in Afghanistan, and it became a matter of a family day actions to watch the news and see what's going on, and that's no longer the case now. But that's the fact that we all remember that people, we are having an over 38 million population. People live there, life goes on. There are challenges, there are enormous challenges, there are also opportunities. And even though we are not making it to the top level global discussions as we were maybe until a year ago, but a lot of things are happening, and it's important for us from Afghanistan and for our partners across the world to systematically watch over the situation, record, and express and communicate that to the world. For purposes of knowledge production to begin with, we are in academic circle here, but also for purposes of how things can get better, one way in areas that I was mentioning. So specifically coming towards the question of education, I think I have to confess, I'm not an expert in education per se. My PhD title is development studies, so I get somehow the liberty of using this multidisciplinary topic developments to discuss distantly, not more technically, about questions of, for example, education. And it becomes very important at the moment, even in terms of the broader development aspect, if we see, because Afghanistan remains to be the only country in the world in the 21st century that we are existing and living that is ruled by a force that, without any justification, simply put it that way, without any justification, denies half of its population from higher school. So I have to be specific. There are sometimes you hear Taliban have changed from the time they were ruling between 96 and 2001 and comparing it with now. Yes, they have changed, because in the past they were banning all education, and now primary schools are open, first to 6th degree above or closed until high school. And as a result, this becomes very, very challenging for people, because basically from north to south, east to west, secondary school and high school are completely denied to girls. So that in itself creates a situation where the future becomes of a major and grief concern. This, in terms of the education, for a long period of time, also higher education or universities were closed. But because of the resistance from the people, from the families, from the communities, the authorities, the de facto authorities, agreed to open the schools, the universities for women. Even though they started it, there are lots of restrictions, and there are everyday news stories that are hardly justifiable based on the religious, we are a Muslim majority country, so based on the Islamic principles, or based off sometimes the logical understanding of knowledge earning, it's very unjustifiable, the kind of rules that they are putting on the university. I give you one example. They say if there is an academic session, this came to the news a couple of weeks ago, if there is an academic conference, presentations are by mail, female professors are denied access to attend it. I mean, okay, like it's impossible to have the segregation in that level. That tells you a story, or I'm just briefly, I know time is limited, so very briefly say like why this group that came to power is somehow, according to some people, they are representative of the simple, ordinary Afghans, why they are against girls' education. The only way that you could sort of seek the answer to this question is that whoever this group, this political military group is representing, whether it's an Afghan interest or a regional or a global interest, that force is aiming for a future, for an Afghanistan in the future that is completely kept in darkness and not educated. And girls' education become critical for that, because simply put it that way, a mother who is literate, a mother who is educated will produce educated children. A mother who is completely like illiterate can produce very complete illiterate children. And so that's the way that we see it. More could be talked about, but I just probably stop discussion about the education and move on to the issues of governance. Now, the forces came to power, and it's we can talk, I mean, and again, the remaining part, all of it's around the issues of governance. So education was one field we focused on. When it comes to system of governance, Afghanistan, historically speaking, and also in the last 40 years, we have grown to become a very strong sort of patrimonial society. And the patrimonial society, or the patron-client relationship, worked in ways of, and basically it was easier for the external intervening forces to arrange the system of governance in this way, because instead of dealing with the vast majority of the population, they dealt with a group, selected group that were picked up in different stages of the last 40 years history, picked up, funded, you know, basically introduced as the great leader and so forth. And then they were paid in order to deliver to their sort of donors, if you like. So that created a patron-client relations in the country. Gradually, throughout the last 2 decades, especially since the 2001 interventions, I would say, what happened to this patron-client relationship, that the relationship or the link, the return from the patrons to the clients became very messy. It wasn't very simple that I become an MP, for example, or I become a minister, or I become somebody key in the Afghan political elite circles, and then I'll return to people. So basically, whoever got into the top of the power sort of ladder, they just took the ladder with them and ran away. That's what happened, really. In terms of return, there wasn't much relationship left with people. People, vast majority remained in poverty, and the very minor, small, tiny minority who had core of the power, they become corrupt, they become unaccountable, and they basically gain and maximize their own very, very personal profits. And that probably became the reason for the collapse of the former government or governance order. I'm talking about the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan order. The Republic in itself was a powerful institution. It created systems that were good, that were functional despite all the challenges. But the people who occupied these systems, due to lack of accountability, due to massive external dependencies, they couldn't maintain it. And the whole external dependency was so extreme that by the departure of the last soldier, American or international soldier from Afghanistan, everyone was trying to even hang themselves from the plane and run away from Afghanistan. That was the level, symbolically, the sort of level of dependency that we are talking about. So as a result, the governance system was like that. So how is the governance system now? the Taliban governance system is not I cannot sort of completely exceptionalize it in a way of say that we have no idea how this is, but somehow the Taliban the governance in the Taliban sort of time has to be distinction between Taliban as ruling force and Taliban as insurgency, who were the part before August last year. The new form, the Taliban who took over Afghanistan, they basically become a de facto authority, meaning they take over all the top political positions of the government. They also kept the technical in large, according to our sources in different ministries, the technical people were kept in their positions. But the problem that we face is basically those who taking over the top positions. Some of these positions require knowledge, they require expertise, and those are completely lacked. And that's why there are serious crises when we look at it in different aspects in different ways. An interesting thing that is happening, and I say that as my own particular expertise, is on local governance relations. At the very local level, what happened, and there are examples a bit early to sort of make complete conclusions, but I'm just sharing here some observations. In some areas, for the first time in long time, I would say, they have tried to select local authorities at district level authorities. That's the lowest you go in terms of the Afghan governance system, by the votes or by the willingness of the local population. So, for example, in provinces like Bamyan, the Taliban authorities come talk to the people and say, look, we let you basically come up with nominating a person as your district governor. We watch them. If they violate the rules, we will just get them out. And it happened actually when they violate and they become corrupt or they did something wrong, then they were removed. So that's one model. Another model of selection in the positions is very, especially at the ministerial level, in the top level, is very sort of not transparent, untransparent, I would say, and very vague, because apparently most of the political appointments in the judiciary sector, especially also in the executive sector, are all basically issued through a written order or decree that is signed by somebody that no one has seen in public, meaning the leader of the supreme leader of the Taliban. So this ambiguity in terms of not having someone and not knowing the face of someone who is issuing the decree has helped the Taliban in terms of maintaining their control and maintaining their sort of coherence within the regime. And personally, as someone from Afghanistan, I can say that there are comparabilities between the Taliban ruling now and the way that they rule the government or run the government, and when the pro-Soviet regime was sort of ruling the government. In terms of their ideological, they were more socialist communist way, and this is also an ideological group, mostly Islamist, if I can just briefly say that. But the approach that they have is very similar in the sense that you have to be a Taliban to become someone at the key position. So that is something that we need. Of course, learning and explaining this more is probably requiring more time. And also for us, it's early because we need to see how this is evolving. We are only 7-8 months since they have come to power, and how that evolves as we move ahead, especially in terms of picking up people at the local level in consultation with people, with the population is something very interesting that doesn't match the top level selections, if you like. The final discussion point I have is, I know time is quite short, so I will be trying to be brief, but it's, I think, the most critical part. Afghanistan today, despite the fact that we have Ukraine, and I know everyone's attention is towards that, is declared the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, where more than half of the population are threatened by famine. 23 million people are in the process of becoming completely starved. That's the reality of the depth of the sort of crisis that we are facing on. Now, we see that we are a country that's, for the last 2 decades, thanks to the international community's support, at least in the development and infrastructure sort of reconstruction process, things were happening, and there were possibilities of having, support. And I know my time is up, so the one that I selected. So I will just be very brief here. So in terms of development aid and assistance itself, we've come out until last year, August, through a process or a situation where majority of our development infrastructure, if you like, were all donor funded. And even the government, the state building process was massively donor funded. So the military support, the army support, the social services, health, education, all of this was donor funded, externally funded, massive percentage of it. Now, within that situation, suddenly what happened is that a lot of the international donor funding for development stopped. And that created the crisis. The reason we have half of the population in starving is because they all depended on the external funding for development assistance. Having mentioning about development assistance, I have to also remind the audience that Afghanistan has also gone through, in terms of the development aid and assistance, has gone through a very bumpy road, if you like, if I can say, meaning dependency was one phenomenon that was a challenge. Another challenge was mostly the militarization of development assistance. The provincial reconstruction teams, part of different military country programs, was offering doing development, but with a military uniform. That created a situation that the neutrality and the impartiality of the development aid assistance providers didn't remain independent and became more affiliated with military and with others. So coming out of that situation, now, one thing that I personally see as a very dangerous path is to keep calling or keep asking for funding that feeds Afghans. Yes, we are the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, with 23 million population starving, but is provision of emergency assistance and food the only solution to feed the half of the population of a country? My answer is that maybe yes, for an immediate, but not in a longer term. So concluding now and moving towards sort of a way forward, what I can say in terms of the broader sort of conversation and discussions, I think in the area of education, definitely what we are hoping to see is not only by the Taliban, but also by the international community and by our own population, obviously, is that education should remain depoliticized and not linked with the politics. That probably will pave the way towards possibilities of focusing on it more and allowing, because I mean, simple as this, I explained the more sort of a deeper reason of why girls' education is, why there's a gender apartheid basically, and when it comes to education. But there's also a political explanation where probably this became a kind of a bargaining chip between the Taliban and the international community, unfortunately. In terms of humanitarian development aid and assistance, I think it's really critical to look into possibilities of focusing on aspects of humanitarian responses that in the longer term saves the population and offers them opportunities. And finally, I think in terms of way forward and things that are in our hands, I mean, these two sort of way forward the reflections that I shared probably are much broader and a little bit out of our immediate hands. But I think as a researcher and as a scholar myself, what I can sort of mention here is the critical nature of continuing research and learning processes. And that could be done by researchers and people in academia who are on the ground, building stronger partnership with universities, with educational and research institutions across the world. And that helps, and keeping a record and not having these black holes in the history of countries like Afghanistan, that they go in war, there is inaccessibility and there is nothing possible. So strengthening those partnership and exchange sort of opportunities between Afghanistan and the rest of the world, I think will also save us in building that sort of knowledge connections in both ways of Afghan researchers and scholars learning about international sort of knowledge centers and hubs, and also providing this vice versa in different parts. And then finally, collaborative in the collaborative projects, working on collaborative projects between researchers in both Afghanistan and abroad is one solution. And I'll just end with more emphasis on building the human capital in Afghanistan. I'm sure in every country there is a need for that, but the crisis that we are facing, the level of deprivation in terms of education that we are facing does require very special attention, I would say, particularly to the female, I would say, to the girls. And this is why one personal mission that I have in my own sort of time, dedication of time, besides leading AREU and besides doing other personal sort of volunteering work, is to ensure that every girl, and we have many of very talented, hardworking girls who are in search of scholarships, learning and educational opportunities abroad, we help them to get out and to learn and to be knowledgeable, not necessarily in one or two fields, but across the fields and sectors of education. So scholarship opportunities is life-changing. And I say that not as one of those statements that people make. I say it based on my own experience of how my own life as a refugee one time in my life, in my earlier ages, has changed through education and through building this relationship with the outside world. And I hope to see that in the future of many of the girls from my country. And I just ended here. Thanks again for all your attention, listening to me, and I look forward to conversations and responding to questions. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Orzala, for a wonderful talk. Now we are going to have about half an hour for question and answers. And so we have few hands. So let me ask first, Abdul Awab, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Nemat, for your very comprehensive review and current situation of Afghanistan. I'm Tawab Sarjuki. I'm a lecturer at the College of Public Health and a researcher in the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona. My key question is about the legitimacy of the Taliban rule and how it can impact the development services, including research. I'm coming from a public health background, and I know that the rule of Taliban has impacted the services and health system. And now, and as a result, there must be a way to think about how to do that and how the academic community can contribute to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Tauhid. Should we take a number of
Yes,
questions?
please take.
Thank
No, but you answer it if this you want. You know, we have time. So.
Oh, very good. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Saljuqi. It's a great pleasure meeting you. And your question is one that is, I think, very critical. The question of legitimacy of Taliban. Look, how Taliban came to power is not through legitimate means. They just came to power through violence. And took over. Okay, maybe if a Taliban representative was here among us, they would argue that no, actually we didn't come to Kabul by violence. We were dragged to Kabul. And we all witnessed that. It's just a yesterday's story. So everyone witnessed they didn't come to Kabul, but their overall taking over was violence. So any action that is through a violent and force cannot be considered legitimate. Now, I made a very, very brief comparison between the PDPA time and now. PDPA, by the way, for those who are not familiar, is People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan. They were the pro-Soviet regime during the 1978 onwards ruling. And you had to be a Khalqi or a Parchami or a Khalqi to become part of the sort of game in different times, I have to say, or else you had zero chance to work for government. And now it's the same from what we hear. You have to be a Talib or else chances, or have a very high level political sort of back support that could probably consider you as an example. There are here and there examples of non-Talibs gets to some positions. So when it comes to political legitimacy, I think now here we speak based on evidence. There isn't any indication or signs of that. De facto authorities, we call them, because they are de facto rulers of today's Afghanistan. And in that sense, what is the possibility in terms of doing an independent and impartial research? I think if you just declare it impossible before trying it, I think it's not very responsible. So one way, if you take a political and principled stand, is to just say, you know what, the Taliban came, took over Afghanistan, goodbye. We just become exiled and we all leave. Another is that, look, we are an independent and partial organizations. Let's try what are the possibilities. There is ethical board. You come from the public health. And I remember going through a very systematic board of the ethics in any public health research. And my hope is that that ethical board is still existing and is able to operationalize research and allow us to operationalize research in the public health sector. So far in the areas that I mentioned that my organization is working, we've come across people, the technical people from the former system, that still they are on their place and they follow those rules in these very low level circles, and that allow us to conduct research. But the moment our independence and our impartiality comes under question, because this is a different ruling regime than the ones that we worked under before, I think that's the moment that we will have to make a decision. Stay, continue the work, or just declare that the work is impossible and just move to something else. I think that's my response. So as a researcher, I have to say that principles, values are critical, particularly when it comes to the ethics of research. And now we find it in ways that's, okay, technical approval from the ministries. We are, for example, working with Ministry of Economy as a non-profit NGO, non-governmental organizations. We have to keep transparent in terms of what we do to the de facto authorities. That, to us, is the way. But political legitimacy is something I think we should rather, as researchers, we should rather sort of stay away from it at the moment. In future, probably things will be different. I will just leave it there. Thank you.
Ranjina, please go ahead.
Thank you and good morning. It is wonderful to see my colleague and good friend, Orzala, Dr. Orzala Nemat. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have sort of a comment / question, but I think you've already answered it in that, particularly in the education sector, we unfortunately were very short-lived in our systematic approach of depoliticizing the Ministry of Education, which unfortunately, when I inherited it, it was deeply politicized. And we were not educating children, girls and boys in Afghanistan for the sake of building their capacity and the skill sets required for a nation to have, but rather to fulfill the desires, wishes, and needs of politicians, whether they were in the parliament or across the government, to make those legitimate politicians happy and happy with what the ministry could offer. And when we did try to break that corrupt system, unfortunately, one of the personal experience I want to share with the audience today is that the international community was not very happy with breaking that structure either. So, while it's important to understand and hear that, when we point blame, the blame goes to the previous government, which was not perfect at all. But I also want to highlight that the international community, the international experts, the diplomatic corps representation present in Kabul prior to the fall was not very technically driven in supporting organizations like the Ministry of Education in the first place either. So everybody internationally and nationally were involved in that component. Second, there's now this new movement, and I would really like to hear your opinions internationally and globally on addressing the education, particularly for girls, and various different NGOs, whether they're international organizations or local organizations, are figuring out a way to continue education service for the population through various different NGO structures. Personally, I'm afraid of that, because when you don't have a unified system to deliver a form of education, you also run into the fear of fragmented education services across the country, which in the long run can also demobilize education at large, because there's no way to control who's teaching what to the population. And curriculum was a huge component of the ministry's problem that we had, because for the past 20 years, we had a curriculum that is considered by experts as a trash can model, where everybody just came and dumped their trash in the curriculum without looking at the relevancy of whether the children of Afghanistan were really in need of the kind of things we were teaching them or not. So your opinion about moving forward, if we do allow and support NGOs, whether INGOs or local NGOs, in the long run, do you see a threat to that model as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hamidi. It's indeed a great pleasure to have you and to hear you after a long time. In terms of specific campaigns that you mentioned, I'm not very specifically following it, or I'm not familiar with it. But I would like to, listening to you, I would like to say something. You're absolutely right in terms of politicization of education in the last, particularly in the last 2 decades. Both of us, you led as Minister of Education, and I was once in a very much smaller scale. I was once offered very briefly a position of a senior curriculum advisor, which I refused immediately within 3 days, I would say, because I realized how extremely politicized that was back in the days. You're absolutely right. The core of education is not just mechanical or action of leaving house, entering a building called a school, sitting on the chair and leaving back. No, it's what children learn there. And this learning experience was something that unfortunately was not satisfactory at all. As somebody who started very grassroots, I'm reminded of the time, 99, 2000, 2001, when the Taliban, the same Taliban of today, were ruling. And when we were in the group of people who were supporting me in that mission back then, building home schools, basically for women, for girls, teenager girls, at that time also they were denied their basic right. The advice I got from our community at that time in the refugee communities was that, listen, forget about the wartime curriculum. Just go back to the king's time curriculum. By the way, Afghanistan was kingdom before 1973. So just say that that 40 years of peace is what, of course, it was not an ideal curriculum at the time, but it was the one that taught the children that we were teaching in those days something distant from the war. And okay, it was a good response at that time. Now, fast forward, one of the completely unforgivable orders I remember by the former president of Afghanistan, I mean, he did many unforgivable things, but one was that let's make a decision to completely censor the last 40 years of history from the Afghan curriculum. Okay, maybe this in an immediate way, you would see that, oh, Orzala is contradicting herself. How one time you were supporting the same thing, like basically censoring and teaching children wartime, but that was an emergency situation. A country completely led through a republic system, and you simply censor 40 years of history to the children. What happens? My nephews were students, they pass Darlaman Palace and they say, who actually destroyed Darlaman Palace? There was a dispute among the children in the car. One says it's destroyed by Russians, another say, no, it was destroyed by Mujahideen, and another was say, no, it was actually by this and that, by Taliban. So look, so definitely, I think the core of the education is curriculum. What is going to happen now in the current situation, what the context is sort of indicating, we are in the worst. Okay, now we are talking about the 200 and something days that girls are denied of the access to school. That campaign must continue. We have to raise our voices about these injustices. But tomorrow, as soon the schools are technically open towards the girls, we have to realize what are going to be taught to the children. And unfortunately, Afghan scholar community have so far completely failed on this area. Every group came and pushed their own agenda in the curriculum. A healthy and a more kind of education-oriented curriculum is the best in the way forward. And probably this platform is one that I can raise this and together with you, and I'm sure there are many others listening to us at the moment, that we should look for possibilities of bringing around a group of scholars who have actually technical expertise and curriculum development. In my little, very, very tiny little capacity, at least I encourage some Afghan education master's degree students to go further research in this area and train themselves, because we needed complete independent technical experts who can help us build a very healthy, up-to-date, and more kind of impartial curriculum for Afghanistan in future. I think we have to go beyond expecting the governments, whether this is Taliban, we see the former government fail to do that. What are we expecting from Taliban to offer us in terms of curriculum? Absolutely sure it will be worse than whatever we have seen in the history. Not because I'm judgmental here, but because the evidence shows their entire education is from madrasas, and madrasa education is very important for probably Islamic learning, but scientific matters require scientific knowledge and understanding. So therefore, I cannot emphasize more on the curriculum development, which we have completely failed in the past, and the need for it to be strengthened further as we move forward. Thank you.
So next, Martin, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Hi, Orzala. I'm Martin Duvenberg. I'm the head of the economics department here at the University of Arizona. And I'm a behavioral theorist. I try to understand the dynamics of human interaction using game theoretic analysis. And thank you a lot for a really interesting lecture. And, you know, I'm thinking about this, the Taliban are in power. You described how by and large they deny women education. You know, it's sort of shocking to hear this. And I'm wondering a series of connected things. First, what percentage in Afghanistan are Taliban? What percentage of the population support the Taliban? How strong is the opposition to them? How fractured is the opposition? And what would it take for the opposition to replace the Taliban, and what might come instead? And should we hope for that? Is it desirable? And if so, how do you have any ideas on how we might incentivize moving in that direction?
Thank you very much, Professor Martin. As you are an economist, you mentioned, I have to be careful to give you specific numbers because I will put myself in definite trouble if I do that. So I'm afraid giving a specific percentage will be a little bit problematic at the moment. Historically speaking, Taliban are a political military group. They took over Afghanistan in they started to emerge as a Taliban in 94, but they took over most part of Afghanistan territory by 96. They ruled until 2001, and they were toppled by the American international intervention back in the late October 2021. And somehow they mechanically or technically, they were disappeared from the face of the earth at that time, meaning that they left to the safe sanctuaries else in the neighborhoods, mostly to Pakistan. And then since 2006, 2005, 2006, they started to re-emerge. And there are lots of similarities and differences between the previous Taliban and the ones that re-emerged after 2005 and 6. A lot happened to the movement itself. There are plenty of books written by Taliban themselves, but also by others about them. I rather would recommend the books that are written by the Taliban leaders rather than others issuing opinions. Now, what is the percentage of the Taliban? I would say as a political military group, they are a very tiny and small percentage. And normally it is like that. We know that monopoly over violence is a clear indicator of understanding who rules a place. And one interesting thing with Taliban is that they've managed to have that monopoly over violence as soon as they took over. And that is not because they are a massive group. That is not because they have a full 100% support of the entire population, but there were so many other factors and elements that facilitated this process to them and somehow facilitated their return to power. I cannot simply forget a statement by one of the Taliban leaders, Mullah Baradar, as soon as they took over Kabul. This is like when they were caught by surprise, coming to the front of the camera and saying that by God's will, we reached Kabul. We ourselves are completely surprised. If I don't forget, these are the exact wording that he used. And I always will remember that because okay, God's will is, of course, God's will. No one can change it. But before we realize we reached Kabul is something that they themselves had the explanation to it. Now, the supports that they had, now we are talking about situation where some of their actions, including the girls' education and the restrictions on women, and also gradually moving towards more increase on the crime rate, which decreased dramatically after they took over, and now it is again sort of going up. And also because of these actions that they take against, more restrictions in the educational system or job access and so forth, some level of relative supports that they would receive as the newcomers who came and going to save us, and there will be more security and stability than before and so forth, and there will be less violence, they are losing that support and they have lost that support. Your answer, like, who are the resistance forces? There isn't a very highly sophisticated organized resistance force against them. And I don't go into details of this, but I would say there are pockets of resistance here and there. If you talk about the military resistance, sometimes it happens. There are operations particularly in one region among the rest of the country. But these resistance are not highly organized because let's not forget the history of Afghanistan over the last 40 years. I mean, you go to a longer history of Afghanistan, but focusing on the last 40 years, no military action, including whatever we are seeing now and whatever we have seen in my lifetime at least, is happening in Afghanistan without the orders, without the connection with outside world. In this outside is outside the Afghanistan immediate borders, the neighborhood, and much far borders, which means global. And actors in Afghanistan or people in Afghanistan that are having power or military access or whatever, as soon as you dig who they are funded, you will be surprised the level of intervention. It's not like one unique to say it's one country specifically doing something. Everyone wants a stake there, whether with the current regime, former regime, before regime, all of this. So that higher level of dependency to the foreign forces has resulted in completely even depending the entire resistance movement or resistance groups to depend on external forces. And something interesting happening, probably because of the practical experiences, a lot of the countries who financed and supported or provide or facilitated hosting these anti-Taliban groups in the past, they've all decided to become very, very careful and not immediately form a group and send it back to Afghanistan to fight the Taliban. That's the reason we don't have a very organized resistance movement, quote unquote, because by the way, movement has a different definition in terms of, like being something more self-led. In Afghanistan, the movements are all like, well, in general, are significantly externally dependent. So that sort of make what we call resistance, and I'm talking until now about the resistance that is military or armed, The unarmed forms of resistance are incredible. And I want to draw yours and everyone else's attention that I think they are the most powerful means in the hand of the people, people's power as we talk about it. And I think that resulted in some significant kind of actions over the past 7-8 months. There was a period that secondary and high school for girls was completely banned. And we had 7-8 provinces in Afghanistan where the local communities convinced the local Taliban leadership to open the schools for the high schools for girls and secondary schools. And they agreed, they opened it. But something happened at the top leadership of Taliban from 23rd of March, 2022, that they said, you know what, everyone is forced to follow the same rule and you have to stop it no matter what. So all these 7 provinces had to force. So in that sense, I would say that there is a very powerful non-armed resistance that says the Taliban ideas, the Taliban mindset in many aspects are not acceptable to the people of Afghanistan because they don't represent purely religious values. Our religion is teaching us that gaining education is obligatory for girls and for boys, men and women. Taliban are denying half of this Islamic principle. They are not representative of the cultural because the cultural and tradition of Afghanistan is very diverse from north to south, east to west, and so forth. So you cannot impose one form of cultural values over the other. And they don't, some people try to say, and I'm saying it here, they also try to portray that, oh, Taliban are more like rural, traditional, and not urban minority that, are funded by Westerns and so forth. And I say, no, actually, I come across men and women even from rural Afghanistan who are now campaigning for girls' education. Very traditional looking Afghan men are calling on the Taliban leadership to open the schools for girls. So to me, they don't simply represent those values. This is a particular group that represents a particular ideology, particular mindsets, and it's good for themselves, but they cannot claim so far that they represent the majority of the Afghan population.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm learning a lot. Thanks, Orzala.
Okay, so next, Firdaus. Fardosh.
Yes, thank you.
So, yeah, go ahead. So Firdaus is my former student. He is now working for Orzala United Nations. So he's joining us from New York, IAU. Go ahead, Firdaus.
Great to see you. Thank you so much. And it's great to see a lot of very familiar faces here. Dr. Nemat, thanks for your presentation. Great points. I have 2 quick questions. Was the Taliban's rapid victory expected in Afghanistan? I hope your answer is not positive. And why do you think the government collapsed easily? And my other question is about the current efforts on development. As you know, Afghans are living in very bad situation in crisis. Over 90% of the population have experienced insufficient food consumption or malnutrition. So what are the next steps that we should take? And there was also a question about the legitimacy of the Taliban. Do you think it's possible to work with Taliban to address these problems? And how about the human rights, women's rights, and some other problems that you mentioned in your presentation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Firdaus John. It's a pleasure meeting you, and thank you for basically shooting too many questions at once. I think some of your questions I covered in my earlier conversation, so I'll just try to be very brief to allow others to also take part in asking questions. In terms of whether Taliban so-called victory was expected or not, I would say that to the majority of the people, it wasn't. It wasn't because they thought, okay, one way or another, the chances for a group that is not entirely popular because of the actions in practices by them across the country was a possibility. But as a matter of fact, everyone found themselves suddenly under the Taliban ruling. Why the government collapse? If we put it in very simple ways, the government didn't collapse for one concrete reason. There were many, many factors. From the international point of view, from the international relations point of view, we should not note August 15, 2021 as the collapse of the government. If you look deeper into what was happening to Afghanistan, February 29th, the year earlier was the actual date, 2020. So that was the time that actually the United States, together with the international community, supported and directly signed an agreement with Taliban, bypassing the entire government and the entire, let's call it, the democratic system in Afghanistan. And so when you try to bypass a relatively legitimate government, let's say relative here, and this is what you expect. So there was a direct recognition by the international community that resulted to that level of confidence that the Taliban took, and then they moved forward with that. So that's one. But then within the system of Republic, there was so much unaccountability, so much corruption, so much nepotism, so much inefficiencies in many, many aspects, that the over-centralization of the decision-making on national interest issues, I think they all become very powerful reasons for the result that we have witnessed. And let's put it simply, it wasn't just one incident that, they say, Ashraf Ghani ran away and that's why it collapsed. Yes, that became like the symbolic act of it, but we have to note all different events that happened just before that resulted to that point of why. And we all witnessed the fact that the Taliban did not take over Afghanistan by force, by fighting the soldiers, the national army, the previous regime national army. It wasn't like a direct fight to take. Violence was used. Of course, the fear and violence is different, but there was not a lot of action or fighting. It was just surrendering one after the other provinces here. And finally, in terms of the next steps, I think there is a lot to be done. And like I earlier mentioned, in general, just because Afghanistan is going to fall off the international agenda, you are in the United Nations, probably there will be more sessions now on Ukraine than on Afghanistan, despite the fact that there is a complete starvation and humanitarian crisis going on. We have to sort of try to maintain Afghanistan discussions, in academic discussions and development aid related discussions, and also in broader discussions in terms of like what lessons could be learned from this experience. Afghanistan was a country that had the presence of many international actors in it for over 2 decades. And what went wrong, why they went wrong is all requiring like at least PhD theses, master theses to reflect upon. And I think most of the students here joining me I hope that from each country that they come, that they had representation in Afghanistan in one form or another, they should pick up that and just try to learn what their country's men and women did in Afghanistan. Was it right or wrong, or how we can learn from this in future? I think that's the way forward, one of the ways forward to look at it. And moreover, for the educated Afghans, I think there is a lot to be done, even though we are physically not in Afghanistan. If we are in Afghanistan, there are opportunities. I encourage everyone to take action and do things that is within their possibilities, teaching, researching, studying, so forth. If we are outside Afghanistan, like I say, properly curriculum development is one example. There are many examples of constructively engaging with Afghanistan in different capacities and try to build opportunities and possibilities for example, we talk about the field of education for Afghans who are left behind, for Afghans who live in the country, and over 38 million population, maybe very tiny minority, as tiny as probably not even 1 or 2% of the country are able to make it out of the country. The rest of the population is there. So I think one way to support them is to create more kind of virtual opportunities for learning and education, and offer that to the population to not miss their years in school, years in university and so forth, and focus on equal education, like meaning girls and boys have to learn through these new techniques and technologies in order to make future very different. Probably present is what we lost, but we should not facilitate or enable the situation for our future to be lost. I'll just end it here. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question, we will have a few more questions. So next question, Atifa. Atifa, go ahead. Atifa? Yes. Yeah. You are muted. You need to unmute.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nemat, and it's very interesting to hear your point of view. I'm a faculty, library faculty emeritus here at the University of Arizona. I've done some work in Afghanistan for the last 19 or 20 years, going back and forth. But my really question to you is, and my concern actually, is the lack of human resources. That's the brain drain. And as we see a lot of the refugees coming in, they're well educated, they've studied abroad, so we've lost them. And this is a void. How can we really remedy this void? And when we're talking about building curriculum and doing research in Afghanistan, this is a major problem. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and how could be done to really refocus our attention to the issue of human resources?
Thank you, Professor Rahman. It's a pleasure meeting you as well. I think you're absolutely right that the human resources, in terms of human resources, Afghanistan is indeed facing huge problems. And one of the immediate actions that I remember right weeks after the situation last August was continuous announcement by the Taliban authorities. For example, they needed customs and revenue staff. They were like continuous announcement that we are not going to harm you, just come back and join your positions. The same is with several other ministries that we saw. So in terms of the technical capacity, you are absolutely right. Whoever has the opportunity will not stay there, unfortunately, or it's their right, and you cannot. I think I do not allow myself to say, no, you stay in your country and so forth, because I myself couldn't stay for some reasons there. Although I'm hoping very soon to be able to work and return. So human resources is a challenge. There is a lot of capacity there still. This is not as advanced as in the past, because those who had the opportunity to internationally study or have the opportunity to continue their education internationally, they may take some years off to continue their educations. And that is a gap, that's creating a gap. The best way to fill this gap is to open more educational opportunities to Afghans, especially as we are here having the conversation in an academic circle, especially providing educational opportunities for those whose statements are somehow indicating that they are interested in the field work in their own sort of context and so forth. So that would be really good, because there are many, like our own researchers, several of them already have offers from universities across the world trying to do their masters, continue their masters or PhD studies. But because they have been field researchers for many years, 10 years, some of them 5, 6 years, 10 years, 12 years, they will have the opportunity to go back whenever the situation gets better. So this is a period that, because there is a broader humanitarian crisis or political crisis, if you like, we are not yet there in terms of a full 100% stability and so forth. As a researcher, I see this as an opportunity to invest on human resources and building the capacity of the Afghan youths for immediate future and for the longer term future. So the best way to build that is through these partnerships, through providing learning and educational opportunities in different fields. And I have to say, social sciences is fine, like there are lots of opportunities. On other sort of lab-based science and technology, there are very limited opportunities for Afghans to study and to get scholarships. So building that human capacity, I think, will address the immediate responses in the next year or two, as soon as they go back and start working. And B, it's also important that Afghanistan will step towards more self-sufficiency and not depending on outside or international workforce in the human resources part. So at the moment, for example, we know that those who were educated in the neighboring countries are becoming more available in the market in terms of the job market to get them. So that will address some of the human resource gaps that we are facing. But longer term, there has to be, our hope is that things will get better, that those who are investing on their educational capacity building now will be ready for the next few years to come back and to really work. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. Jarina, now you are next.
Can you see me? Okay. Thank you, Tashakur, Dr. Nemat. So my name is Zarina. I'm from Denison University. So I'm originally from Tajikistan. So my question is about cooperation with the neighboring countries, especially with the Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, because I know Tajikistan didn't recognize the legitimacy of the current government. I was wondering if you see any, I would say, like maybe a light at the end of the tunnel, especially after cooperating with the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan for the government, for the current government of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zarina John. I think definitely building partnerships and relationships in terms of academic relationships and on the human resources investment is very critical. And with Uzbekistan and with Kyrgyzstan, for example, we've had these partnerships like through some universities, like the University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan has received a lot of Afghan talented students. I think also in Kazakhstan, there has been opportunities for Afghan students to go there. I once remember Kazakhstan offering quite a significant number of scholarships for Afghan students. So in the past, this relationship existed. In the present, you know that when scholarships are offered by countries, they are linked to the political sort of recognition and the legitimacy of the de facto sort of authorities. And that is a little bit sort of messy at the moment because there isn't a very straightforward, everyone tries to engage with the de facto authorities, but no one is formally talking of the formal recognition. So my point to those, to our neighboring countries, particularly the Central Asian countries, is that there has to be sort of a mechanism that goes and somehow bypasses the political systems and offer these opportunities. Because look, more educated Afghans means more safer Afghanistan in the future. And the neighborhood definitely requires safer Afghanistan. And for that, this investment is worth it, even if it comes through non-governmental means that offers these opportunities for the younger generation of Afghanistan. So I probably may sound completely idealistic here, but I think that the need for building those partnerships, institutional partnerships, is more higher than any time in the past. I can say about AREU, the organization, the think tank that I am leading, we tried to build this relationship, but when things changed, we've somehow slowed down. But we are part of a CARIC network of the think tanks in the region, and hoping to sort of at least maintain that relationship of exchanging knowledge, research, having sort of like conferences to inform our neighborhood about the situation in our country and vice versa, to learn about theirs through our own researchers. So I think there is a room for further work on that area. Thanks.
Thank you. Tashakur.
So Prashit, this is the last question, and then I may have, if there is a time, I will have something to ask.
Thank you, Dr. Nemat, for presentation today. I joined late, so I might have missed, some of the portion of your lecture. But I wanted to ask, in terms of educational policy in Afghanistan, there are there are different ethnic groups and tribal groups in Afghanistan. So I wanted to ask, this diversity, does it impose any challenge, or is it, it makes advantageous to, develop some cohesive educational curriculum for the country? How it is shaping up and how it was shaped up in the past also. Thank you.
Thank you, Pratish. Very important question indeed. When it comes to diversity, you are right. Afghanistan, in terms of its geographical landscape, it's a mountainous country, massively mountainous. And one characteristic of mountainous terrains is the diversity. For example, we have a beautiful valley called Nuristan. And although everyone who is not from Nuristan thinks that Nuristani is one language, but if you get to the valley, you will know that actually one valley speaks completely different language from another valley, and they don't understand each other. So that's the sort of the depth of the diversity that we are talking about. In terms of ethnicities, also we are diverse. Afghanistan has been at the crossroad of Central Asia, South Asia, and even Middle East to some extent, if you consider Iran as our Western neighbor as a Middle East. So we are just at the core of these different regions. Each region have their own socio-cultural characteristics. So the diversity of Afghanistan is beautiful because in the same small country that is born in 1747 and continue to live so far, so you go to the northern Afghanistan, you see a lot of similarities with the Central Asian countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and so forth. You come to the south and east, then it's more South Asian culture. To the west, it's more like Iranian and Persian culture, massively influencing the country in terms of language and values and so forth. There is also religious diversity within, although we are an absolute Muslim majority country, we have also within Islam, we have Shia and Sunni communities and Ismailis and several others. So diversity is part of our identity. And I think it represents the mosaic that Afghanistan is. Unfortunately, because we have lived at least the last 40 years in war, in a protracted years of war and violent conflict, diversity, as much as it is a positive aspect and it's a strength of our society and community, it turns to become basically a weakness, and it became a weakness used by our enemies in general, whether insider or particularly outsiders, to provoke one against the other. And although these attempts in terms of ethnic factionalism, in terms of the religion or sectarian factionalism, there has been like tremendous level of efforts and attempts from outside. It didn't really reach somewhere significant as in some other countries probably. So attempts are always already made, and already as we speak, there are attempts being made in terms of provoking one ethnicity against the others and vice versa. So that is ongoing. And I think it's part of the violent context characteristics that you have, they find basically ways to basically turn people against each other. Now, when it comes to have a cohesive educational curriculum, for example, I think a cohesive educational curriculum means that it responds to the reality of Afghanistan. And it becomes more positive in the sense of highlighting the beauty of Afghanistan's diversity. In our own families, in our own communities, learning from our earlier generations, it has always been the case to just say that, okay, diversity and being different is a strength. And we have to build upon that instead of saying, no, we have to be very solo, one or another group against the others. In terms of power relations, there is a difference. There has been injustices in the past in terms of power relations, meaning one group ruled over the others, denying their rights, historically speaking, in the longer periods of history. And that needs to be changed differently. There has to be equal distribution or equitable distribution of resources across the country, across the diverse groups and communities. And that in itself will pave the way towards more sort of stable communities and society that we would be seeing in the future. So in that sense, whether it is the issue of curriculum or it is the issue of broader service delivery across sectors, I think the injustices in Afghanistan because of the war and violent conflict that we experience is all having a sort of a deep link with the external forces trying to provoke the issue of diversity in a negative way to sort of continue rule. And a famous saying of divide and rule by the British Empire in the time is something that is quite predominant even now as we speak, unfortunately. So our hope is to see that differently and at least introduce differently. Some of our actions, some of our sports, music, and so forth in the past have really contributed in building this further in terms of, promoting a positive aspect of diversity. And we hope to see more of that actually happening as we move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for it.
So thank you, everyone. Orzala, I have one last thought, and if you get a time, briefly address this, and that will bring us to the conclusion. So one thing I have been thinking a lot, particularly after talking with you and over the last couple of months in particular. To me, it seems like that whether Taliban will continue to play an important role is beyond the question. Even though my colleague Martin Duffenberg asked you about the level of support that Taliban enjoys today and the level of legitimacy, even if they do not remain a dominant power, leading power, they are going to be instrumental. But what is right now happening is that international community basically has washed away. They do not want to work with Taliban. And so my question is, do you see any path forward for the future of Afghanistan in which Taliban is able to work with international community and vice versa and find some workable ground? Because the reality is that we cannot wish away that Taliban has to go away. They cannot play an important role, and some kind of locally other alternative leadership will emerge. That is what we had for the last 20 years. The government did not last even for 24 hours. They fled, all of them. So the question. So do you see that? Because I feel like unless we find, the reality is that Taliban and international community will have to find some common ground and make an incremental progress where they can live together and focus on real development, humanitarian, and as well as development challenges of Afghanistan. So what is your view on that?
Well, this is more of a political question with a political nature. So what in general I will say is that accepting Taliban as part of the Afghan reality is important. We cannot simply deny their existence, their power, their influence over, military control of the country and their influence over the population as well, as we see the way that they're ruling. So complete blocking and systematic dehumanization of a group, no matter if it is Taliban or by Taliban, other groups are being dehumanized, has not resulted. War on terror was one of the biggest failures of our history in the last, I think, over 20 years, because we saw what it produced: more radical, more violent, and more sort of ugly faces of reactions. And we saw that by fighting, by destruction, by killing, this is not going to work. And we saw that in practice. We don't need to sort of like trying it again. What is going to be the result if we try the same thing that we failed in the past? So engagement in principle, engagement is the way forward, because you have to find out the ways that there is a level of safety and security in trying to access this conversation in a more constructive way of saying, like, do you want, what do we want, what the people want, most importantly, and how we can reach there. So some of their very over radical, restrictive approaches is keeping and widening this distance that people feel between themselves and the Taliban as the ruling forces. And I think if they continue like this, there will be a very short-lived ruling. And look, I mean, history of Afghanistan, not only the 40 years, but the longer term history of this particular geographical or geopolitical location tells us one thing very clearly: nobody managed to conquer this area. So if the superpowers of the time didn't conquer it, do you think supporters of a sort of a very immediate sort of regional powers are going to conquer it? No. So it's very simple like that. And the ways that they oppress at the moment, this is not going to result for a very long period of time to stay in power. But if there are sort of reforms, there are steps taken, very responsible steps taken towards inclusivity, towards principles, respecting the core principles of human dignity, including human rights, including women's rights, including the rights of the minorities. I didn't mention here, but there are tragic incidents happening every day as we speak. Today, there was an explosion killing over 13 people in northern province of Balkh, Mazar Sharif. So the other day, 2 weeks ago, or 10 days ago, we had a school being blown up. If this continues, we are not in a very different place than where we were last year or the year before. Last year, just before, in the first 3 months of 2021, just before the Taliban takeover, Afghanistan had the highest rate of violence in the country and the highest losses, record level actually in 20 years. So if the same violence return, if there are no safety and security for people, then what are we looking for here? I think the way forward in terms of longer term future is political engagement, sort of like discussions and continuous engagements, rather than military actions, because the result of the military action was worse. The result of violence in oppression was worse. Neither Guantanamo Bay nor the war on terror, none of them actually helped to bring us anywhere better than before. And we saw that evidently, look at where we reached. We were where we reached. And for that reason, I think way forward, just to sort of emphasize, is through engagement, but more constructive engagement that leads to results that are beneficial to the majority of the Afghan population, men and women. They all deserve it's their right to decide about their future, and they have to be sort of, they have to become the core of the decision, not the former or present political elites. Unfortunately, the way the world engages in these kind of situations is to just engage with the top leadership of this and that group. And I desire for a different system, really, because the system that really brings the representative of the people as the core of it, rather than these elites that are made by ourselves. And now we talk to themselves. It's just you talk with your, the hand puppets, and that would not really bring us anywhere better. Thank you.
So with that, this has been wonderful a talk, and thank you for joining, and thank you for everybody. Orzala, one thing I wanted to just pass on to you: Provost Liesl folks had to go for another meeting, but she sent me a message that she's looking forward to meeting you in person in fall. And from University of Arizona, we look forward to keeping our engagement and with you and your research center and everything you are doing. And so thank you for joining. I know it is way past after Ramadan and fasting, and so it is a long day for you. And it has been really, really insightful. Thank you for doing it. And thank you everyone for joining. Next IfAD talk is on persistence of income inequality in Latin America by Nora Lustig. So this is, thank you everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thanks to all of you.
Well, thank you. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.